that's okay. Just is everybody here? Maybe not. We have to wait a little more. Okay. No, I need to download a video, which is on my computer and not on this one. Okay, then okay, we'd like to speak about debris daunting and the effect on fatigue life. Before to go to the practical application, I just would like to make an overview of debris daunting, how it happens, why, and to give you some idea of the mechanism involved behind that. Then okay, this is what I will present. Then I will go back a little to EHL lubrication and to some tests that we have done. And after I will go to the practical application. Okay, this is the content of the talk. Okay, then this is not a PowerPoint. Okay. Then to do the test, what we have done is to develop first a test bench. Okay. Okay. Then the idea is the following. You know there is a lot of contaminants in oil, even if it is a new tank, a new barrel. Okay, you can buy a can, and if you look what is inside, I will show you later a lot of particles. Then to do experiments, what we have developed in the lab and for some other companies that are using the same type of test bench is first we use a conical tank. Then why a conical tank is to avoid concentration of particles. Then what we do, we put some particles in the oil. For example, you have 10 liters of oil. You put 1 milligram or 2 grams of contaminants. You know the size, and you should take particles and you should sieve them in a class of size. For example, 5 to 10 micrometers, 10 to 20, 20 to 32 micrometers. When the size is very big, let's say above 32 micrometers, it's not too difficult to sieve the particles. We use, in fact, metallic powder, which are spherical particles. It is made by liquid metals that you spread into cold air, and you get some very small spherical particles. Okay. And when you have to sieve that, when they are of large size, it's not too difficult. When you have to sieve a class between 5 to 10 micrometers or 10 to 20 micrometers, it takes a long time, and also you need a lot of raw material to do that. Okay, then the principle is to have here some particles in the oil. First, second, to have something without corner or things like that. So the particles should be always moving in the oil. There is no chamber where the particles can accumulate, for example. Then it means that everything should be conical, and all the pipe should be with a flow within a turbulent regime. When it is turbulent, nothing will stick at the border of the pipe. Then it's very easy to calculate which size of the pipe you should use. You just have to know the flow with the pump, and then you manage to have a turbulent flow. And the last point about that, for the pump, you should be careful about the type of pump, not to use a gear pump, for example, because a gear pump will deform the particles. If you have metallic particles, then you should have a pump which is not a gear pump. Typically, a screw pump, for example, it's a good type of pump. Okay. And then after that, we have a small, what we call here a peristatic pump. We just have a few, a small percentage of the flow, and you can lubricate a machine like that. And knowing the number of particles per liter, for example, and knowing the flow you have here, knowing also within the two rollers, when you know the film thickness and the speed, you can calculate the oil flow. And if you know, for example, that you have 1 particle per liter, if the oil flow is 1 liter per minute, you should have 1 particle per minute coming to the contact. This is the principle. And to be sure that you have the correct number of particles, you have a particle counter here, and it counts. Then there is a small derivation, and it counts particles one by one. This is an optical sensor. This type of device now is used on some aircraft engines, jet engines, and they monitor online during flight the number of particles. Okay. Then this is the principle that we develop, and then after the experiments, you may clean the oil. Then you have a very fine filter here, and with a three-way gate, you can clean all the oil to remove all the particles. And when you do that, to lubricate the contact, it can be also a bearing. You can do that for a full bearing, but you should have a bearing within an equipment without the same, without corner and so on, because you won't be able to clean the system. Here it is very easy to clean it, but not for a full bearing. It depends on your device. And then here, for example, what we used to do is we managed to have a short test, a few minutes, and very often we stop to lubricate with contaminated oil, and after we just perform a fatigue test with a dented surface. And we know that, for example, we should have 1,000 dents if you lubricate like that for 10 minutes. And we stop the lubrication, we use clean lubrication, and we perform tests. This is the principle. Then this is an example of the number of dents you can produce with that. Then the first demonstration was to show that you can predict the number of dents. Okay? Again, you know the number of particles you have within the oil. You know the oil flow, which is the speed multiplied by the thickness of the HL film, multiplied by the width. Okay, you have then you can calculate. Then in black here, this is an example of measurement. This is the number of dents that we have counted, about 1,000, a little more than 1. This is a log scale, okay, a little more than 1,000. Now, for example, if the class of particle is between 20 to 32 micrometers, and you know how many milligrams you put in the oil, we can know that for the largest size of particles, you should have something which is, for example, 900 particles. If you have smaller particles, you will have more particles. Then the estimation will be this one, a little more than 1,000. Okay, and then you can, don't remember what is estimation measurement. Okay, then and for the second test here, we change the duration of the test. For example, we double the time. We do another test with doubling the time. The third test here, we add some sliding. First it was pure rolling, after it was sliding. Here we increase the load by a factor 2 or 3 or 4. That decrease the HL film thickness, then that reduce oil flow within the contact. And also because the film thickness is thinner, maybe you can reject some particles. And the last one is done for bigger particles and so on. Then just to explain you that with that, we were able to demonstrate that when you have 1,000 particles coming into the contact, they will all come into the contact. Okay? And it will be for particles typically between 10 and 32 micrometers. And the film thickness is below 1 micrometers of thickness. Then it proves that this is only experimental work. It proves that particles are not ejected from the contact. They go through the contact. Okay? Then this way you can dent the surface. Typically, this is different type of denting you can observe. The first one is for metallic particle, M50 is a bearing steel. There is a specific shape. Maybe I will explain you that later, but at the beginning, in fact, you crush the particle just at the top, and after a while, then you start to indent both surfaces. And after a while, because it happens very quickly, you start to heat the materials and you start to flow. Then after a while, the yield strength of the material is slower. It creates this type of shape. And also we were able to see that on particles and also to measure that on the surface. Then this is a real schematic view, but coming from experiments. When you have brittle materials, AFTD, in fact it's a sand. It's a silicium. It's a sand coming from some desert in the US. And it's something, they sell the sand it's very expensive, very, very expensive. A kilogram should be a few $100s. Because it is calibrated and there is a norm, you have such number of particles smaller than 2 micrometers, and you have a Gaussian distribution, and then above 100 micrometers, there is almost no particles. And there is some type of, not Gaussian, but a distribution of particles. And this typical sound is used to make a test on many devices. For example, for helicopter engines, they use that for ingestion of sound into the engine, and this is a standard method. Okay. But this is not the main purpose. It's here just to see that when you have a brittle material, it will break in many small parts, and you can observe on the surface not only one dent but many dents each time a particle of sound enter into the contact. And these are also done with ceramic. Then bore carbide and silicon carbide. These are real dents that we observe in our experiments. You can see the size here with many small particles around, and this is with a very the same ceramic materials but at high speed. Then you crush everything. So you have a lot of many small dents. Okay, this is what I said before. This is experimental with a twin disc machine, high speed twin disc machine. But anyway, I will go quick, fast. Okay, then. Okay, this is typically what you can, the simulation you can make if you have a EHL solver. Then in green you have the deformed geometry within the contact. You can see here the dent. Then there is a dent with two shoulders. And in red you have the pressure within the contact when the dent is coming into the contact. Here there is a small slide-to-roll ratio, which is 1.5%. This is the ratio between the sliding speed to the rolling speed. And you can calculate after that, you can calculate the stress distribution within the material. Then typically this is what we use as material. It's a 52-100 steel, disc of radius 40 millimeters with a high quality roughness, 0.1 micrometers as a roughness. The lubricant is aerospace lubricant, which is 530 stock at 100 degrees C, which is used for most engine bearings, turbine engines. Temperature is 80 degrees. Particles are made of M50, and here the size from 32 to 40 micrometers. Okay, it's easier to manipulate. And typically, we did two types of tests. Test with 2.5 gigapascal at low speed and 3 gigapascal at high speed, 40 meters per second. And then typically these are the dents that we observe, the mean value, diameter of 40 micrometers, which is much higher than the size of the diameter initial because it is deformed. The depth is 2.5 or 2 micrometers, which is very shallow. In fact, it's a very shallow dent. It's not 35 micrometers I have shown Monday or Tuesday. And the shoulder height is typically 0.8 micrometers or 0.5 micrometers. It depends on the speed. Then we did several tests with the dent on a slower surface or the faster surface. I would just like to show you the effect of slide-to-roll ratio. I think this is quite interesting. This is interesting physics behind that. Okay. And typically this is the geometry of the dent. You can see how it looks like. This is not made by an indenter. This is made naturally by natural contamination. It's not purely axisymmetric. There is some slight difference. Also, there is some damage ahead of the dent or behind the dent. It depends. And I think the circle does not correspond to the exact position. But you can see for the same dent, after 1 million cycles, 20 million, or 200 million cycles, how it evolves. I don't know here if it is a pure rolling or not. Okay, this is pure rolling on the top, and this is with a very test A2, test A1, A2 as should be before. A1, A2, B1. The difference is slide-to-roll ratio and the contact, the normal load. And if the disc is located on the fast or on the slow surface, then there is always some slide-to-roll ratio, and you can see here how the damage can propagate nearby the dent. then propagate height of the dent according to the friction coefficient. I would like to mostly to emphasize something which is due to the sliding. Then, okay, this is the location of the spole. It can be ahead or back to the dent. Okay, maybe not this one. Okay, this is we can skip this one. Okay, now two important figures to explain you how it works. This is a solution when you have a shallow dent, which is not very deep. Then this is a pressure distribution, okay? And the dent, for example, if the dent has a depth of 1 micrometer, due to the elastic deformation, on the deformed surface, you can notice the dent. It is completely squeezed by the deformation. Here we are in pure rolling. And sometimes in the literature, I have seen a paper many years ago from a Japanese group. They said that if you put some dents on the surface, many dents, in fact, using a laser, for example, it could be beneficial for the fatigue life. Why? Because you can see here that when you squeeze the dent, it will release some oil. Then it will lubricate. Even if you miss some oil, it will be beneficial. Okay? This is correct. Only if you have a very shallow dent and if you have no shoulder. But this corresponds to this situation. Now, these are two other situations. Now the dent is deeper. Then, when it is deformed, you can still see the cavity. Okay? And there is also some peak of pressure which is due to the EHL lubrication. On the left, you can see that the minimum pressure is not nil, which means that there is no cavitation. Okay. Then you can have that. It's quite typically for depths from a few micrometers. You can have typically this situation. You can see the dent, and you have no cavitation within in the vicinity of the dent. Now, if you have a very deep dent, you will have this type of solution. You can see the dent, and you have cavitation in the center of the contact here because there is no pressure. Then there is two points. The first one is that when you cavitate, it means that you may have metallic contact around the dent because you have no lubrication. You have cavitated, then you may have metal-to-metal contact. Then it can be very detrimental for the life of the bearing. And the second point is that numerically, this is very difficult to have a correct solution because you have to solve the cavitation problem within an EHL. And I think that today there is almost nobody that can do that. It's still a subject of research to have an algorithm that gives the EHL solution in 3D when you have cavitation, because you should maintain the equilibrium of the flow. Okay. Okay, these are some numerical experimental data. These are the effect of the shoulder. You can see on the left a dent without shoulder. Then the peak of pressure are very small, and dent with a shoulder which is not very high, 0.5 micrometers. You can see a very huge magnitude for the peak of pressure. Typically here, the peak of pressure is about 2 times the Hertzian pressure, and here the magnitude is about 3.5 times the Hertzian pressure due to the shoulder. Then the shoulder is a problem for dents. And okay, this is for simple sliding. It's not what I wanted to show you. I don't know. Okay, we'll skip this one. I got a problem with that. Okay. Then this is what happens when the dunt enter into the contact. This is the entrance on the left, and now you have the dunt moving into the contact. Okay. This is a fluid mechanics problem. First, the liquid, the oil, is moving at the mean speed between the two bodies. Okay. And of course, you may assume that there is some sliding or no sliding at the two walls, but classically, you may assume that there is no sliding, and that the fluid is moving at the mean speed of the two surfaces. Then the lower one is going faster than the top one. This is the first one. Second one is that the lubricant is at a very high pressure. And then you remember, it's very viscous. It's in the glassy state. And because it is moving at the mean speed, when the lower surface is moving faster, it means that the pressurized oil will move ahead of the dunt. And when it moves ahead of the dunt, like that, it will generate a peak of pressure ahead of the dunt. Okay? And that explains why you can damage the dunt in front of, you can manage the material, you can damage the material in front of the dunt. This is the opposite if you have the lower surface which is moving slowly compared to the top surface. Then the oil within the pocket will move slowly, and then it will mark and dent the surface behind the dent. Okay? Then this mechanism is very important to make a difference between pure rolling and rolling plus sliding. And now let's go to the real application I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you first something else. I don't know what it is. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, then I will investigate this accident. In fact, this is a failure of a helicopter gearbox, the main gearbox of an helicopter. And this is not this helicopter, but something. In fact, it was a Puma. The name is a Puma, Super Puma. It was a crash in 2016 in Norway. Then we have been required to make some investigation for Airbus, and we did the work with tools that we developed for Safran. And typically on the left, you can see the gearbox. The gearbox is a big gearbox which is just below the rotor. And at the entrance, depending on the number of engines, usually you have one, two, or three entrance from each engines. And the horizontal movement, you have spiroconic gears, like here, and you convert the horizontal rotation towards vertical rotation. Okay, and typically the entrance, the speed of the engine, there is already for each turbine engine a small reductor, and then the entrance into the main gearbox is between 20,000 RPM to 6,000 RPM, depending on the size of the engine and of the helicopter. And the rotor, the rotation is between 200 to 400 rotation per minute. Then you have a very strong reduction rate. Then in this situation, it is a catastrophic failure. You cannot allow that. It's not permitted by the authority. Okay, then I would like to show you maybe a small movie to start, just to see what happened. Then in the movie they explain the situation, it was an accident and so on, and they will explain what they did to find the problem. All the actions they put in place to avoid that in the future, because the fleet of helicopters was stopped for at least 6 months, I think, everywhere in the world, to try to find the solution first. And after a few months, they restarted all the helicopters with a lot of maintenance stage. They have to make some check if 10 hours or each 100 hours of operation and so on. Okay. Then should be this is the file. I don't know if the format will be compatible with the computer. Okay. I don't know if there is some noise, some sound.
The H225 LNOJF
Without sound, I
helicopter,
have to speak.
operated by CHC Helicopter, suffered a fatal accident near Troy in Norway. Each and every one of us was deeply affected. Understanding what happened that tragic day has been a #1 priority for Airbus helicopters ever since. We have made all our human and material resources available to investigators to enable them to complete their work as quickly as possible. Initial observations revealed that the rotor had separated from the cabin. In response, we began by listing all the possible scenarios that could have led to such an outcome, even the most improbable ones. One by one, every branch on the fault tree analysis was put to the test in order to confirm or rule out each hypothesis. We drew on all the information gathered by the investigators on site to piece together exactly what happened. Each and every detail was taken into consideration. We also used complex numerical models in simulating different failure modes, comparing them with observations of the actual parts. In the meantime, we considered and examined a 2009 Super Puma accident that bore similarities. Finally, we carried out about 2,000 hours of testing in dozens of different tests, the aim being to reproduce the failure scenarios envisioned and to identify which one actually occurred. In total, more than 370 people were called upon during the course of a year. Throughout the official investigation led by the Norwegian Accident Investigation Board and supported by Airbus helicopters, we were able to identify precisely the sequence of events. The origin was traced back to the inside of the main gearbox, a key mechanism in the aircraft, as it transmits power from the engines to the rotors, while reducing rotational speed from 23,000 RPM to 265 RPM for the main rotor. The inside is a series of reduction stages comprising gears manufactured using the finest material and surface treatment technologies and in line with the highest quality standards. The second stage, epicyclic gear train, comprises a sun gear, 8 planet gears, a planet carrier, and a fixed ring. Each planet gear contains 2 inner races, 2 rows of rollers, 1 outer ring. It is inside this ring that the failure began, with an initial and very limited spalling. Unexpectedly, this very limited spalling gave way to a crack, which then spread until the planet gear split in two between 2 teeth. The space between these 2 teeth grew, causing a collision with a tooth on the sun gear. the planet gear broke instantly. Pulled by its own inertia, the main rotor caused the top section of the main gearbox to shear off and separate from the structure. Let's go back to the beginning, however. How could such an accident have happened? The potential contributing factors were identified, and safety barriers were put in place to eliminate their reoccurrence. One of them is the non-detection of very limited spalling. Spalling is a normal degradation of bearings that remains acceptable up to a certain amount. This is monitored with magnetic plugs that collect the metallic particles. In the case of LNOJF, the defined practice of particle detection was not sufficient to reveal very limited spalling. We have therefore improved this practice of metal particle detection. The frequency of inspections has been significantly increased. Stricter removal criteria have been put in place regarding particle sizes. Detection methods were completely overhauled and now include a latest generation magnetic plug with increased performance. Another potential contributing factor is the phenomenon of fatigue. Some metal parts subjected to high repeated stress have a defined number of cycles before their possible failure. Airbus Helicopters therefore defines a maximum operating time for each part. In 2004, Airbus Helicopters defined a maximum operating time in accordance with the certification requirements. In 2017, based on the learnings from the accident investigation, this maximum operating time has been reduced by a factor of 4. Another potential contributing factor is linked to the design of the planet gear. Two suppliers manufacture these planet gears, and their designs are not 100% identical, even if both match the technical specifications. The second creates greater contact pressure and was used in the LNOJF's main gearbox. This planet gear has now been prohibited outright. The only planet gear now present in our Super Puma family has registered 22 million flight hours without any outer race spalling having been detected in normal conditions. Another potential contributing factor is external damage occurring to the main gearbox. Before being fitted onto the helicopter, the main gearbox in question sustained a fall during a road transportation accident. It has been decided to withdraw from service any main gearbox having suffered a shock, a lightning strike, a hard landing. In addition, we put in place a series of initiatives to improve the shock resistance of the main gearbox during transportation and to better report back any unexpected event. Sensors that capture parameters such as temperature, pressure, altitude, lighting, inclination, and shock level have been placed on the main gearbox, and previous history of the part can be closely monitored. The packaging for the main gearbox now includes highly visible stickers that change color if the crate sustains a certain level of force or shock. The last potential contributing factor is a contamination by impurities finding their way into the main gearbox during maintenance, which then could have created damage in the planet gear leading to spalling. Additional measures have been put in place to protect the main gearbox during maintenance operations, and disassembly of main gearbox modules can now only be performed by an Airbus Helicopters certified maintenance or repair centre. The safety barriers put in place are aimed at eliminating the contributing factors to the LNOJF accident. Based on these measures, the European Aviation Safety Agency and all aviation authorities worldwide have approved the return to service of the H225 and the AS332L2. Any accident is one too many, and in order to reach our zero accident goal, we are committed to continually improving. The investigation underway led us to thoroughly review and rethink many of our quality and safety processes, not only for the Super Puma, but for all helicopters in the Airbus range. One example is how we are working on improvements for handling and tracking dynamic components. This includes developing better solutions for documentation, repair feedback, and digital solutions for better traceability. Furthermore, taking what we have learned from these investigations, we have gone back and checked the stress analysis for all our aircraft.
Okay, in fact, you can find this video online. It's somewhere on the internet. It's a public one. Then you can see the problem. Okay, it was a debris denting, in fact, at the origin, and the crack propagated just below the surface without forming any spall, because usually you form a spall, you know, some spalls, some metallic debris, and you have a device that can get magnetic particles. And when you have too many metallic particles, you have a signal in the helicopter. In the past, sometimes the pilot used to stop the good engine and used to let the wrong engines in operations. Then it was several crashes in the past due to the error of the pilot. But okay, here it was no advertisement because it was no spalling, no metallic particles in the oil. It was not possible to detect that. In fact, there is two techniques. In the old helicopters, also in the old time, because sometimes it was cheaper to buy an helicopter without electronic device, the mechanician were checking the magnetic lip each time the helicopter landed. But now it's mostly in the cockpit. Then the pilot can see if there is something wrong. The same also for aircraft engines. And maybe let's do that like that. Read that properly. I don't know which one it is. It should be E. This one. Okay. Okay, then this is the context. Okay, then what about classical failures? And on the left, you can see some butterfly. I said before, you have the inclusion in the middle, and you can see the two wings of the butterfly. And so you can see some cracks here. Typically, the cracks occur at the boundary between the wing and the steel. Okay. Yes, this is what we call this is a typical subsurface rolling contact fatigue. And on the right, you can see a surface with many dents. Okay, this is completely different. Then in the old time, we used to have a subsurface fatigue, or for bad quality materials, metal. But now we have mostly this type of damage, especially for aerospace application. And this is what we are looking for. The size is very small, and they are very shallow, no more than a few micrometers. Okay, now you have to know that there is many particles even in a new oil. When I was working in one of these companies, at the beginning they were using 200 liters barrel like that to take fresh oil with something with any type of recipient, bottles and so on, and they used to use that to transfer oil into the engine. Now they have a specific device. They use a pump with a filter, with a very high quality filter, typically filter of 3 micrometers, to transfer the oil from a new tank like that to the engine reservoir, to be sure the oil is very clean. And also when they test the engine before to release them to the customer, they use even bigger filters to be sure to clean the oil at the maximum. Okay? And when you do some maintenance, also you have to be careful not to ingest particles. For example, when you are outside, if there is some wind, if it is you have some sand outside, you have to be careful not to open the oil reservoir to renew the oil, for example, because you will ingest a lot of particles. And typically, this is what will happen after a dent. Then you can see here the early beginning. First, you can see a crack, and then the crack will start to propagate, and like that. Okay. Then now it depends of the bearing. For example, I used to change time by times bearings on my car. It makes some noise on the wheel, especially on when you turn in one direction. It depends where is the damaged bearing. But you can drive. I have old cars. I can drive 1,000 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers. There is no risk. Now, if you have that on a jet engines, So US Air Force did some experiments like that. It's typically the order of 1 or 2 minutes. After 1 or 2 minutes, you have to eject. If you have a mono motor, mono engine. Now if you have 2 engines, it's better. But it goes very, very fast because the rotational speed is very high, typically 40, 50,000 RPM. Then it goes very, very fast. Then in a jet you have to eject. The same for an helicopter, although it depends where you are. For example, if you work in the mountain, for example, to transport wood, it's very dangerous to land. Okay, now if you are on a flat country, you are higher than 100 or 200 meters from the sea level, from the ground, by auto-rotation you can land. But only if there is a flat area, not in the city and not in the forest or in the mountain. Okay, then what I will present you is something which is divided in 4 steps. Then it corresponds to 2 PhD theses that we developed to give them tools to reproduce that and to optimize the device. Then on the left, I will show you some debris daunting. Then this is a simulation done by a finite element method. There is, I think, no other way to do that simply. It's not very simple, but okay, we can do that with the finite element method. Second, we will look at some fatigue criterion on the dent. Then we will evaluate different type of approach, Dangevin, Fatemi-Soki, and so on, to see which one tends to give you some interesting results, response to your problem. We will deal also with EHL contact. I will show you what I started to present to before, the effect of lubrication. And after that, we will start to work on the quark propagation. And for that, we couple our approach to what is developing a colleague which is working on quark propagation by XFEM, extended finite element method. And we were using a free software which is available on okay, you can have it free. Okay, then this is okay. Now you can see the objectives that are different from industry and from academia. Then for industry, they would like to have some new design rules to mitigate the effect of surface denting. They would like to have some criterion for that, for the fatigue of the material, which is not very well understood. And also they would like to have some tools when they do some screening for maintenance, for example, if they have to change or not the bearing, if the damage are enough harmful, or if you can neglect the damage and remount again the bearing. And then for us, we develop a new model for debris denting, what I call natural denting. We are able to make a parametric study. Then, okay, the originality of the work for the finite element method is because we are using what we call CEL approach, coupled Eulerian-Lagrangian model. Then, in fact, the particles is described as Eulerian, like in fluid mechanics, because there is a lot of deformation. And when you have a lot of deformation with the finite element method, it's difficult. When you use Lagrangian method, it crashes very quickly. And you can use ALE, augmented Lagrangian method, but you need to update the geometry each 10 time step. You have to give something. And even with that, it can crash when you have a large deformation, large strength. Then the optimum for that was to use a CEL approach. Okay, and then with that it was possible to do some comparison of different criterion for rolling contact fatigue, and also to see the effect of EHL. And also we did more things. For example, we investigate the effect of residual stresses. Because the surface is treated, there is a chemical thermochemical treatment, and the surface is hardened, in fact. Okay, then typically on the left you can see particles. The initial shape was 32 micrometers of diameter. It's a cylindrical particle. Then you can see now at the end it's about 10 micrometers. Okay, and you can see on the top there is a bump here. Okay, then I call that like a flying saucer shape. British guy calls that a camembert. cheese, French cheese. Okay, anyway, and okay, and you can see how it deforms. Then modeling of denting. Then in the past, what has been done was always some finite element model, except for one researcher. Then the first work is due to Ionides from SKF. Did that with the finite element method, but it was only in notation. In fact, it was no dynamic effect. Then a few years later, in 2004. Then Kang and Sadi from Purdue University, working with Mike Oprich, which was from Timken. They did a model like you can see here, and they were able to compress a dent with between two rollers. Then this is a 3D approach, and this is a dynamic approach because you can consider the dynamic effect here. Then it was the first attempt to get something, and it was quite nice. The idea was working. However, you can see that the particle is not too much deformed. Okay, it was only in pure rolling, but it was the first step to solve the problem. Another guy from Imperial College was Nikas, and he did everything analytically. Then he developed a model. He transferred all the force to the particle. He predicted the deformed shape, the heating of the particles, and so on. But it was quite heavy to manipulate, and except him, I never saw another paper on the topic. Okay, he published several papers on this topic. Okay, then this is what we did. You can see a simulation which is below. Then we have here the Eulerian domain. Okay, then the particle will deform like a fluid, and around the two bodies are in fact in a Lagrangian with a Lagrangian mesh. It's possible to do that with Abaqus. Several years ago, the main difficulty with that, maybe 10 years ago, because we did some work on cold spray. We simulate cold spray with this technique. It was not possible to estimate the heating of the particle. It was only isothermal. Now it's possible to transfer part of the deformation into heat, and then to predict the temperature of the particle. Okay. Then now you have the tool. When you develop the model, you can change the geometry, you can change the material, you can use not a spherical one, but a square, a small cube, and so on. Okay. Now you need properties. This is one of the difficulties. Then here we decided to use a Johnson-Cook model. The Johnson-Cook model gives you the yield strength depending on the plastic strain rate and the temperature. Okay? In fact, this model is mostly empirical. You have to take that from the literature, and okay. And also we consider that the plastic work here is transferred at 95% into heat. Okay, then is an inelastic deformation, in fact, transferred to heat, and will heat the particle. Then you should know also the properties of the material versus temperature. Then this is a typical reference situation. We have here, for this approach, we use the same steel, classical bearing steel, low temperature bearing steel, 50-100. We have two surfaces that are moving at 20 meters per second. We have two friction coefficients, one between the particle and the surface, and one between the two bodies. And in fact, between the two bodies, I think we use something frictionless, or maybe 1%, something negligible. But you need to have some friction coefficient between the particle and the bodies, because otherwise it will not enter into the contact. It should be trapped to go into the contact. Okay. The size is quite large, but this is a reference case, and we were able to do simulation with smaller or bigger particles. And also we took some data similar to other colleagues, and from experiment we compared to some data from the literature. In fact, Fabrice Ville did his PhD with me more than nearly 30 years ago, something like that. Then we have a lot of experimental data. And the maximum pressure is 1.5 gigapascal, which is typical for aerospace application, including for and for this application. Then this is a comparison between the result of the model. The blue curve corresponds to the simulation, and the red and the yellow one correspond to experiments. First, you can see there is a good agreement, roughly because it's difficult to have exactly the same parameters. And second, you can see that the shoulder is not axisymmetric. The shoulder 8 here is smaller than here. Okay, then there is some effect of the rolling. There is some dynamic effect. When you do indentation to reproduce artificial dent, is not the reality of something different. You can see that here the depth, I don't know if it is indicated, but okay. This is dimensionless. I don't know if there is somewhere the size of, okay, anyway. Then the main parameter are the dent depth, which is from 0, from the surface far from the dent. This is the depth. After you have the diameter, and you have the shoulder height. Then you have 3 interesting parameters. This one and the shoulder height on the right, for example. Okay. You can make a simple mechanical model to see, depending on the friction coefficient, what you need to have the particle entering into the contact. If there is no friction coefficient, it will be ejected. And then depending on the size of the particle and on the friction coefficient, you can calculate the size of the particles that will enter into the contact. Okay. Now, this is what I said before, some kind of flying saucer shape. At the beginning, on the left, you produce the small dent on both sides of the contacting surfaces. And after a while, because you hit the particle, it starts to flow very quickly, and then you have this type of shape, and it corresponds to the particle you have shown to before. Okay. Maybe not the same particle because there is many particles, but typically we had many dents like that and many particles as I presented before. And then when you remove the particle, you have a dent, in fact.
Can you control the area fraction of dent in that particular contact?
We control what?
Actually, we are making this dent with the help of the small balls.
Okay.
We supply the balls between the two contact bodies.
Okay.
So, can we control that number of dents from that contact?
Yes, yes. In fact, it depends on the number of particles you have in the oil. If you know the oil flow, you can say to have one dent, I should operate during 30 seconds. And if you have two dents, 1 minute, and so on. And plus or minus 10%, you have something like that. Yeah. The most difficult point is to have exactly the size of the particle you want to have, because you have to sieve them by class, and it should be between, for example, here it's between 30 and 42 micrometers. But okay. There is another point if you do experiments like that. Very often when now I don't do any more experiments, but my colleagues are still doing what I did in the past, same procedure. In fact, when you dent a surface, you know that you have action-reaction, then the opposite surface, which is flat, will see the same pressure. Okay? However, the opposite surface has not been hardened by the denting, because here there is some plasticity around the dent that can protect the dent, or even you can have the dent failing. Then very often what we do, we dent one of the discs like that, or also it can be done with artificial indent. We make a few cycles of operation, for example, 1 minute, 10 minutes, up. We stop, we dismount the dented disc, and we use only 2 smooth discs. But one of the smooth discs will have submitted, will have been submitted to very high pressure, and it will fail very quickly. But it's difficult to see, but or sometimes also you can see a mark on the other disc. This is what we call the boomerang effect. There is no dent, but the dent will mark the other disc when the dent is very important. Another interesting point is that the effect of the size of the particle and the effect of the material. Okay. Then, for example, if you have imagine you have two steels in contact, and the particle is made with of polymer. Then it's very soft. When you have a large particle, when you will deform it, it will flow like that, and it will be ejected from the contact without marking the surface. Now, if you trap the particle within the two surfaces, even if it is a very soft one, because it is incompressible, this will mark the two surfaces. Okay? Then this is not because you have something very soft in the oil, some polymer, for example. It can be very critical if it is of small size, because when you deform, and as soon you touch the surface around the dent, around the particle, it cannot move anywhere outside, and because it is incompressible, it will mark the surface. Okay? With air, for example, the same. You can, if you have some particle like that in the oil, you can damage the surface. Okay, and then now I will show you some parametric study. Then, for example, we will change the load from 1.5 and 2.5 gigapascal. We can change the material. Okay, then the 50 to 100 classical ceramic, which is used for hybrid bearings, which is very well known. Something interesting with that, we have been working with some Japanese guy in the past, not too far away. And in fact, with the same name, you can have very different materials, because it depends. If it is coming from a buyer, for example, or it is coming from a Japanese producer, and because this is made with, of course, silicium and nitride, but also with some cement, which is 3 to 5%, and which is mostly based on yttrium, and it is hot pressed at high temperature, but depending on the manufacturer, Toshiba, for example, in Bayer, do not use the same temperature and the same pressure. And then you have the same name, but this is not the same material at all. And the last one is an interesting material. I don't know if you know this material, 60 NiTi. It's like a memory foam alloy, but this is not that. In fact, yes, but this is mostly when you invert the composition of nickel and titanium. 40 it should be a memory alloy type. But this one is what we call a hyperelastic material. It has been developed by the NASA very recently by Christopher Delacorte. I don't know if you know him. He's now the editor of the journal 12 Broglie Transaction. He's not anymore at the NASA. He's retired. He's now professor in US university. I don't remember the name, but anyway. Then it has been developed by the NASA. It's hyperelastic. Then there is almost no plasticity, and it's very light. The new modulus also is lower than the one of steel, but the yield strength is very, very, very high. Okay, and it's you have no oxidation of this material. Then they use this one for the bearing, for the pump, for the bearing in the pump of the International Space Station, for the to recycle water. And,
Sir, here in the formula for SR, it should be U1 mass U2 upon U1 plus U2 by 2.
Yes.
Because it is a mean velocity in the...
Yes, in fact, okay, you are correct. You have to be careful when you speak about the slide to roll ratio. Usually when I use that in a document, I put always the expression, because sometimes the rolling speed is a mean speed, and sometimes it's the sum. Then here, for me, the slide to roll ratio, there is not the 2. It's not. It's UN plus U2. Then it's delta U divided by U, and U is a sum for me. Okay, but you are correct. Very often there is a confusion. We call the same thing, which is not the same thing. 20% is quite high for sliding. Is quite high. Okay, and then also we change the friction coefficient at the interface, and we will use a particle of different materials, 50 to 100 or copper, which is softer than steel. Okay, and size 50, 100, and 200. When it is in red, it corresponds to the reference situation. Then I will quickly go to that and show you some results. And also, yes, it was without residual stresses or with residual stresses. Then we did consider the effect of surface treatment, here, light shading, for example. Okay, then this is, for example, the effect of the particle diameter. What you can see, of course, here everything is dimensionless. Then if the particle is bigger, it means that the dent should be bigger. But in comparison to the diameter, because phi 0 here corresponds to the diameter of the particle, in fact there is almost no difference. Okay? Maybe here, but okay, there is almost no difference, or very little difference, as far as the particle is smaller than the contactor size. Because if it is bigger, you cannot create a dent, it will be different. Okay? Now something which is interesting is what happens if you have two steel rollers, or if you have one steel roller and one ceramic. Then ceramic, in fact ceramic is not only elastic, there is some plasticity, but to see some dent on ceramic, you should have a pressure higher than 10 gigapascal, 10 or 12 gigapascal. Okay? Then for our application, it's behave like elastic materials. Then something interesting here is this is the dent here in red, the dent created by a particle when both material in contact are metals, steels, and this is when you have one ceramic and one metallic roller. In fact, you have almost a double, dent is almost double, but this is because there is no plasticity in the ceramic roller. And just to say that when you have a ceramic material, it is very detrimental for the opposite one, that will see more plasticity. Okay, this is what you have to retain. Now I know that, for example, the company SKF, 10 years ago, they promoted hybrid bearings, or sometimes they also managed to have a full metallic bearing with one ceramic ball. And they were saying that the ceramic ball is very useful to remove surface defect. It will use like machining, in fact. Okay? But except this one, okay, it is sure that the dent will be deeper. This is when you have to choose if you buy a ceramic ball, a hybrid ball, or a full steel ball. This is one of the points you should consider. And this is the effect of the slide to roll ratio. Then the blue curve here corresponds to something which should be in pure rolling. Okay, this is in pure rolling. And when you increase the slide to roll ratio, in fact, you will have a dent which is larger. You will spread, in fact, the surface defect, and also the shoulder will diminish. And okay, then you have a larger dent, and it will be shallower. And normally, also the shoulder should be smaller. Then okay, you can do like that many simulations and try to get some trends, the main results. I did not show you, but if you change the load, there is no effect. In fact, then there is no effect on the dent. The dent is the same. You have the same residual stresses and so on. The friction coefficient plays a role because it will crush the particles. You will laminate the particle, in fact. Then it plays a quite significant role. The slide to roll ratio also plays a significant role. In fact, the friction coefficient plays also another role, which is when the particle is deformed. When you have a high friction coefficient, it is blocked. It cannot deform a lot. It will be blocked. Okay. If there is no friction coefficient, it will be easily flow between the two surfaces. The particle diameter has a very little effect, only when it is very big compared to very small. Of course, the particle material has some effect because it will affect the shape of the dent, the depth of the dent. The bearing material also plays some role, and also residual stresses due to thermochemical treatment. Now let's have a look on the fatigue of the material. You can see here two typical dumps. Here this is a movement of the load, the arrow, and below it's a friction direction. Then I said before that the load movement is interesting when you have butterflies. If the load is moving this way, it means that when you have a crack, imagine that the butterfly is here, you have the inclusion, the butterfly will be like that. Okay, and the crack will be like that. This is linked to the load movement direction when you have to make some expertise, for example. And here, now, for the friction, the effect of friction, and the friction is this way, like that. The crack here is always opposite to the friction direction, like an arrow, like that. Okay, this one and this one, because it's like that. Okay, and this is also something you can use when you, if you want to know why in which direction is the friction, you can use that. Okay, then we use the same tool. Okay, then now. Then what we do first is we use a solution from the finite element method, and we transfer the field from that to our model. And then within our model, after, we are able to make a simulation when a ball is rolling on the defect several times. Because by the finite element method, it's too costly. It will be too long. And we just have to transfer the data. When we transfer that, we transfer only the plastic strain or the inelastic strain. You don't have to transfer the radial stresses. Then you transfer that, you integrate that in the semi-analytical method, and you make the equilibrium of everything, and then you have the solution, the initial solution. And then after that, you may have the ball rolling several times. And also, you have to integrate the geometry of the dent. Then you have both to integrate the plastic state, then plastic strain, and also the geometry, as you can see here, with a shoulder which is lower than 1 micrometer. And then you can investigate what happened after several cycles. Okay. Then, as I said before, due to the friction, you can observe some cracks here, some damage on the opposite side. And this is now when you invert the direction of friction, you have the crack mostly in this direction, in the opposite side, and some damage everywhere here. Then I will present you some results with different criterion. The first one with Sins and Crossland. After I don't remember the order, but with the Smith, Watson, Topper criterion, Dongvan, and Braun-Miller, Fatimi Sogi. In fact, in most criterion, for example, G2 here means von Mises stress, sigma H means the hydrostatic pressure, then the mean pressure. Okay, if you are globally in compression or in tension. And for this model here, you have the critical plane where the crack can propagate. You have the shear stress, or the Tresca shear stress, equivalent to Tresca, and again the mean stress. And or instead of working with the stress, you can work with the strain. Then you have the shear strain and the normal strain. It's equivalent, in fact. Just you have to deal with other parameters. And the Dongvan, I don't know if you know the Dongvan criterion. It's very well known and used in France with a lot of companies. I will present you some results. So, for example, this is the result for the Crossland criterion, and this is the criterion. And each time you have a parameter to give some weight to, for example, to the mean stress or to the shear stress. And von Mises correspond to shear stress, in fact. Okay? Von Mises and Tresca is about the same. If you have something with a pure hydrostatic pressure, von Mises equals 0. Then von Mises correspond to shear of the material, as all other models. Then now you have the constant, which is in fact one of the key. This is this parameter because it can mask a lot of things. Then what you can see on the left is a top view, and this is a cross view. You cut the dent in two. Now, if you check the effect of each parameter, the first one is only here the shear stress, through the von Mises criterion here, von Mises stress. You can see some peak of stress at the surface and nearby the dent. This is the effect of hydrostatic or mean stress, and this is the sum, in fact. When you sum both, and when you see that, you can compare to your experimental results. For example, you can see here that this is blue here. Blue, you are far below the criterion, then there is no damage normally, and there is some damage at the bottom. Then this is strange. This is not what we observe. Then maybe this is due to this parameter. This parameter comes from the literature, but okay. First one. Now the Dangevin criterion. This time we were lucky because we can see that the maximum criterion is at the surface, in front or behind the dent. And okay, one means the failure of the material. And again, you can make a decomposition. This is the effect of the shear stress, which is tau. You have again a constant, a parameter here, which is alpha, taken from the literature for this material. And this is the effect of the hydrostatic pressure, the mean stress. And okay, then this parameter is okay. This is for the Braun-Miller parameter. Then the advantage of this time this is not the stress, which is important. This is the strain. Then here you have the shear strain, and here you have the normal strain. Okay, and when it is tensile, especially, it is quite dangerous. And delta means this is amplitude between the minimum and the maximum. And here again, you can find some interesting results here, especially because we find the good location for the damage, and also we have here the principal direction. Then you can see that it corresponds to the crack propagation, what we are looking for. Okay, then with all your different criterion, you can choose the one you think it's appropriate for your problem. And typically, we have been working also on the second Dangevin model, which is slightly modified. Okay, we are also able to find where the crack could initiate. And okay, then we choose the Dangevin criterion and also the Braun-Miller criterion to do the simulation. And at the end, we mix the two criterion. We keep from the Dangevin, we keep the shear component, and from the Braun-Miller, we keep the normal component, in fact, in terms of stress. And also, we found in the literature the value for that. And Guillermo Morales is working typically on the same type of material, bearing steel with the same materials, and it is also interesting for that because we don't know the parameter. Okay, again, you can find the effect of each contribution, shear and mean stress, or here the maximum normal, the amplitude of the maximum principal stress, and also we can find the direction of cracking. And when we do the simulation on a real dent, this is what you can find. Then we find the correct location for crack initiation. I don't know what it is, that I don't remember. Okay, this is the effect of the friction coefficient between the particle and the body. As I said before, when the friction coefficient is very low, the particle will flow away when it is deformed, and when it is very high, it will be blocked. Then the dent will be deeper. Okay, this is a summary of the main parameters for the debris denting and the consequence of the fatigue life of the material. Okay, now I would like to go back to EHL. Then I just initiate the discussion just before. This is a very nice experiment done by Kaneta in Japan. Then he demonstrated what I said before. You have here the initial dent, you have some rolling sliding. Okay, I can see from the picture that the dented surface is moving faster than the flat surface, than the smooth surface. And here at the beginning, you can see here the pocket. Within you have some oil, which is pressurized at very high pressure, which is in glassy state. Because the pocket of oil is moving at the mean speed between the two surfaces, it is moving at the rear of the contact, because it is moving slower. It's slower than the dented surface, and you can see that there is a second dent that appears due to that. Okay, this is exactly what I said before. And these are the equations. I don't want to. Okay, then you have the Poiseuille flow, which is typically what happens in the convergence. This is what creates, in fact, the film thickness. After that, you have the quad flow in the high pressure region, and you have here the restriction. Then the speed of the lubricant accelerate to maintain the same flow. The last term is a squeeze effect. If, for example, if you modify the load. Okay. Then to solve that, we use a multi-grid, multi-level solver, which is, in fact, we did that because first Babbage did that at that time, and because there is a book from Ton Lubrecht. Ton Lubrecht is a colleague from the lab. He published a book, and in the book at the end you have all the code. Then everybody can take the code and do the same. Okay, this is what we did, and as I said, we don't use that for solid mechanics because it's quite complicated here. You have to jump between one fine mesh to a medium mesh to another mesh like that, and you have several levels. You can have up to 7 or 8 levels, but there is some receipt because you have to do sometimes some V cycle or some W cycles. You have to remain several iterations at a level. Okay, there is some receipt, some experience to deal with that. But okay, for that we use this method, and then we were able to do some simulation, some EHS simulation. Then you can see that when you have a very deep dance, you have cavitation. Then the solver is not today capable of solving that properly. You have to be careful with the results. There is a guy from China, the name is Dong Zhu. He proposed some simplified method to deal with that, but there is a lot of discussion in the literature. I remember a discussion by Kees Venner from Netherlands. Okay, that complaining about the use of this simplified method and so on, but okay, anyway. Then this is more detail what I said just before. You have here a dent which is very shallow, 0.1 micrometer. Then you can see on the deformed shape almost no residual dent. You can see the effect on the peak of pressure, which is very low. You can see something with a depth which is 2 micrometers. Then you still have a full film thickness here. You can see the peak of pressure on both sides. And this is something for 6 micrometers. Okay. Now there is no result for deeper dents because there is some cavitation and we are not sure about the quality of the solution. Just to make a comparison between the dry contact and the lubricated contact, then in red you have the Hertz solution, again as we have seen Monday. Okay, this is the EHS solution, and you can do the same for the dry contact with a dent. Then in red you have the dry solution with a dent, and in blue you have the EHS solution. Okay, then you capture about what happened around the shoulder. You miss what happened in the convergent. You miss what happened within the oil pocket because you have no pressure, but okay. Also it's a good approximation to use a dry contact model for that. And
I'm sorry, the dry contact model, where there is a dent,
yes,
you should be having red. Red is the red
this
is
is
the dry.
dry, yes.
Red.
Pressure on the right.
On the edges, because you're sitting on the edge, so edge loading will be there, and the pressure should be very high.
This one.
It should be more than blue. No?
No, because there is some hydraulic effect due to the fluid. There is some.
In the dry, oh, so it can be higher with fluid?
It is higher with fluid. Yeah.
Why?
First, this is in pure rolling. This is in pure rolling. Now, when you compare pure rolling and when you compare pure rolling to rolling plus sliding, the pressure is higher in rolling plus sliding. Okay, if you do that with rolling plus sliding, the peak here will be higher. In fact, it will be higher on one side, on the side where the pocket of oil is moving, in front or rear. But okay, here. Because there is a shoulder, in fact, there is some small restriction and it increases the pressure. In fact, this is, you create a small peak like that due to because the peak which is here is due to the small restriction here. Okay?
Maybe the
This one creates a small peak at the exit, and because around the dent there is also a small shoulder, that creates a small peak that you can add to the dry
vent is
effect.
also not very, it's got slopes, right? It's not
Yes,
very-
yes, because this is a magnified view. Here you maybe the deformation is 10 times higher along the vertical direction, because it's typically here maybe 80 micrometers. It's only 2 micrometers,
Right.
and this is not the real scale. Okay, then you can see a simulation of that when the dent is passing through the contact. And as I said before, the fluid is moving, does not stay in the pocket when you have some sliding, as it is said right above. Okay. Then typical simulation with different slide to roll ratio, 3%, 6%, and 12%. And typically, when you compare to experiments, you can see this is the shape you can find in front of the dent, which is due to the fact that the lubricant is moving in front or at the rear of the dent. Okay, now let's have a look on the quark propagation problem. Okay, then the idea here was to use two models that we can connect each together. Then the local XFEM model here, the box is made with a finite element method. We use a free software which is Castem, which is quite simple. It's written in Fortran, and then we can couple both. And then here it's the contact, and we create an initial crack like that. We have the ball rolling on the crack, and then the box, then the crack is propagating. Okay, I will explain you the XFEM technique. Then the crack is propagating, it will expand, and then the box will be growing. We have to manage to increase the size of the box to follow the crack propagation, in fact. Then now you can recognize the mechanism we are interested by. What we want to know, especially if how the crack is propagating and why the crack at a given time will branch and go straight to the surface, normal to the surface. This is in fact the mode of failure of the gearbox. Okay. Or why the crack does not go up like that? Because if it will go up like that, it will create a spool, metallic part. You can detect it, and okay, you have to stop the engine. This is the idea. Okay, then we assume that the crack is present. We have been working before to try to determine the initiation site. Then we proposed the fatigue criterion. Then now I think that we know where it will start. But we assume that we have a crack which is half elliptical. We have a given angle from the surface. And in fact, this is quite similar to the work of Canetta that studied that a long time ago in 1986. Did a few things like that. a lot of people in the literature try to work on this subject. You have to know that, for example, for Canetta and for many recent researchers, there is a problem, which is when you have here a quark, you have two faces, and very often they do not consider interaction between the two faces. I mean, when the surfaces are touching each other, in most papers in the literature, they do not consider the interaction. Okay, but we do consider the interaction here in that. Okay, then for the XFEM analysis, what is the technique? Okay, this is for the SAMs. You know, I will skip this one. For XFEM, in fact, the principle, there is two techniques to mesh a quark. Okay, when you have quark propagation, one technique is to remesh. Then you have a quark, you mesh the quark, it propagates, and you have to redo all the mesh. This is a classical remeshing technique, which is used by ANSYS, for example. The second technique is due to Ted Belichko, and it was developed also by Moos. Moos is a guy from Belgium. He used to work in France. I think now he's back in Belgium. And also by Anthony Gravouille. He's a colleague from the lab. And they developed that in the 90s, something like that. The principle is that you do not mesh explicitly the crack, but you make some enrichment of the nodes around the crack. Okay, this is 2D. It can be 3D. Then you have two types of enrichment. You have enrichment of nodes when the quark is completely crossing the cell, the element, and you have another type of enrichment when the quark is within the last element. Okay, then this is what we call enrichment function, which are here. Then they provided the solution for that, and this is now what is used. And depending where is located the quark within the element, you modify the weight function, in fact. And with this technique, you do not have to mesh the quark. You may have a very coarse mesh, which is very interesting. Then this is very, very fast. Also, now you can find, I have a colleague which his name is Molnar. He published a paper explaining that. He provided in the paper the Abacus subroutines to simulate that, for example. Then you can find it's open access. And what I said before is that we do consider the interfacial force between the crack surfaces when the two surfaces are touching each other. There is no interaction, in fact, no penetration. Then you have to be careful, because when we compared our result to the result of Canetta the first time, it was not the same. And to find the same result, we have to remove this facility. And by removing this facility, we are able to find the same result as Canetta. Then the code that we use is CASTM. Now the name is CAS3M, which is a free code. Okay, then the idea is to have the contact model, create a box. In the box, we put the crack. And now all the technique, the numerical technique, is to apply the correct boundary condition, okay? Which is not really easy, in fact, because we have to manage, we have nodes, we have a surface of elements, and we have to transfer all that. Then on the surface of the box we are using, we should be in equilibrium. Then each time we have the traction vector that we calculate on each side of the box, and to be sure that this is equilibrated. Then the idea is to calculate the stresses on each surface of the element. We interpolate the stress, and after we apply the boundary conditions to the box, and then in the box now we have the crack. Then the geometry is very simple. It's just a square box with a crack. We may also use residual stresses. We just have to add these stresses in the resolution, and of course we may have a gradient of residual stresses, or you can have residual stresses from the denting. Then when you have that, you can calculate the stress intensity factor, mod 1, mod 2, mod 3. And then if you have a quark propagation model, you can calculate the direction in which the crack will propagate and how long per cycles. Okay. Then theta means the direction of the crack, and delta A means the increase of the crack length cycle after cycles. And there is also a term to account for the friction between the crack face, because we do consider interaction between the two faces of the crack. And so you can see that the same, we use a jump cycle procedure. We do not have to simulate each cycle, because if it is only 10 nanometers of propagation, you can save a lot of time doing that. Then this is an example of the problem. Also something which is different from the literature. In the literature, sometimes you can find some similar work, but very often they just assume Hertzian pressure distribution, and there is no contact involved in that. Here, we are able to solve the contact. I mean, if there is some surface defect, the pressure distribution is perturbed by the defect, and we can account for that. And because the SAM method is very efficient or fast in time of computing time, it costs nothing, in fact. But when you use only a finite element method, it can be complicated to do that properly. Okay, then you can see here the crack. Then, okay, first we did, because we are working for a company, they wanted to have a comparison to their model, and they have a model which is based on Z cracks with the SAMSEF. Okay, this is something done by another group in Paris, in France. Here, they study the propagation of the crack each time by remeshing the crack after each time step. Okay, but this way we found the same results, and that validated our tool. Now a few results. Then you have then the key 1, key 2, then mode 1 opening, mode 2, which is shear. Normally what is interesting is only the positive value. Okay? Then you can see that the main mode here for crack propagation is mode 2. It's mostly shear in this one. Then when the ball is rolling on the top of the crack, this is a comparison between our technique and the Z-Crack SAMSEF commercial software. And here, it's a variation of the equivalent intensity factor all along here from this point to this point. Okay, then from 0 to the middle here. And you can see also a good correlation between the two models. In fact, for us, it is even nicer because it is very, very smooth. Very smooth. So now we know this parameter, which is given by this equation, taking into account mode 1, mode 2, and mode 3. You can see also the computing time. There is some difference, which is quite significant between the two models. And you can see here an example of simulation. You can see here the crack which is propagating, and the box also which is growing to follow that. So this is just an example. And now, when you have the model, you can modify the parameter of the study. You can modify the initial inclination of the crack, for example. You can modify the size of the contact. You can modify. You can introduce residual stresses and so on. Okay, and also the approach is very robust. You have nothing to do. You launch the simulation and you have the results. Everything is in a paper which is given below. Okay, then now a parametric study just to have now some results. Then there is a friction at the contact that we can consider, the friction coefficient between the crack face. We can consider the result stresses within the body. And we will consider then the reference model is without residual stresses, without friction force at the contact, without friction force between the crack face. And the contact parameters, the load is 1.5 gigapascal for the Hertzian pressure, 0.5 millimeter for the semi-minor axis of the elliptical contact, then in the rolling direction, and 4 millimeter for B, the major semi-axis in the transverse direction. This is then the reference situation. When you have mod 2 propagation, the quark is propagating straight. When you have mod 1, it will branch to the top or for the bottom. For the quark propagation model, we use some data from another lab in Paris. They did experiments with the same materials, and then they provided us some curve. We are not allowed to give the data. You can see there is no scale for the abscissa. But, okay, and this is for mod 1 and for mod 2. Then we have now the material properties. Then we can choose between mod 1 or mod 2 depending on the results. Okay. Then one of the results is here. This one is very important. When you have compressive residual stresses, because it is negative, the quark will have the tendency to branch towards the surface. Okay? And when you have no residual stresses, it will go straight. And when you have tensile stresses, it will have the tendency to go in depth, like that. Now, I don't know if you remember the machine. This is a gear, and there is a bearing integrated into the gear. But the gear is very thin, in fact. And because there is two contacts that are opposite, in fact, you have some, it is initially spherical, but it can become ellipsoidal, because there is some flexion, okay, some bending of and the bending creates some tensile stress, in fact. Then even if at the surface you have some surface treatment, you may have some compressive residual stresses close to the surface, but when you pass the middle of the thickness of the gear, you have always some tensile stress, at least each cycle. Okay. And this is one of the cause why the quark branches like that and break in two parts the gear. And this is really very important parameter. And so you can see the magnitude of the residual stresses, 400 megapascal or 200 megapascal. For I know that for Safran, the specifications they ask for minus 600 megapascal at the surface. This is the requirement when they buy new bearings. This is in the specification for the bearing manufacturers. This is the effect of the friction at the contact. Then when the friction coefficient, it depends on the direction of friction, of course. Although it can play a very important role how the crack is branching. However, when it is lubricated, the friction coefficient is very low. It's typically a few percent. Then, even if mathematically it can have some effect, in the reality, this is not what we expect to see. And although there is the effect of the friction within the quark, of course, if you have a lot of friction, it will stop the quark propagation. Okay, but if you have no friction, typically in mode 2, in shear, you may accelerate the propagation. Then this is what is said here. When you and this is the opposite. Okay, I have to check. Here it is said that when the friction coefficient is higher, the quark is propagating faster. Okay, then all these parameters play a role altogether. This is the effect of the size of the contact. Then first, this is the effect of the pressure, then the effect of the semi-minor axis, and the effect of the semi-major axis. Okay. Then, of course, when you increase the maximum contact pressure, you increase the stress intensity factor, you increase the propagation rate, the speed of the quark. you do not affect the quark direction, and you do not affect the change between mode 1 and mode 2. When the semi-minor axis increases, it plays a role on the stress intensity factor, on the quark propagation, but again, it does not play a role on the direction of quark propagation, and there is no change on the competition between mode 1 and mode 2. And this time, when you increase the semi-major axis here, there is almost no effect on all the parameters. Okay. And then this way, we were able to predict roughly this type of quark. Then this image is the real image of the damage. In fact, they had to go to sink into the North Sea to get back all the parts from the helicopter, and they cut the parts. And this is a schematic view of the quark, the real quark, with many branches. Then you can see here the effect of the residual stresses, which were compressive. Then that explains why we have like the many branches. And after, when the quark reach about the middle of the thickness of the gear, it branches towards the opposite face, and this is the cause of the failure of the gear. And then this is explained by these different steps you can see here. Okay, there is a schematic view here. Compressive stresses and tensile stresses. Okay. Then this is what I wanted to show you. If you have any question, I will be happy to respond to your questions. And this is a very practical application of what we have been developing since many years.
Sir, so can you please go to slide 49? So in this, what is the meaning of the friction coefficient to negative, like the contact less than 10?
Just because if sliding is in one direction or in the opposite direction, okay? Because of course the friction coefficient should be always positive, but just you change the yes. If the roller is moving faster than the opposite surface of the ring or not, this is just that. And positive means along the direction of rolling along the x, and negative means against. Then positive means that the roller is moving faster than the ring. Okay, here. This is the ring, the roller is here. Then positive means that this is in this direction, which means that the roller is moving, the speed of the surface of the roller is moving faster than the surface of the ring. And when it is negative, this is the opposite.
Mu for crack. So mu crack 1 is less than mu crack 2, then
Yes.
we will go for this. It is correct. What I feel is if it is mu crack 2, so we are considering if any other crack is there, if that friction will be higher,
Yes.
it will not go to that side, it will keep on going to where friction is less. So that is correct. My point is, how can we measure the mu for crack?
We cannot measure mu.
So it is like simply we are predicting it is 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, it cannot be measured.
Yes. In fact, when you do model, you give a number for the friction coefficient. I think there is no other way. Just when it is lubricated, it is below 5%. Okay. When it is dry, it's between 0.1 and 0.6 or 0.8. But I don't know.
So this can be presumed on the basis of like what material we are taking and the cohesive bonding between them. On that basis, we can choose that point. If they are having more cohesive bonding, they will be having higher.
In fact, my personal opinion on that, this is only me. I consider that when you have that a crack, for me the friction coefficient should be 1 or more. Why? Because the surfaces are not flat. They are like mountains, valley. They are, it blocks everything. For me, the friction coefficient should be infinite. There is no friction. But in the literature, they put some friction coefficient. Then for me, it should be 1 or more, and not something like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. When you have a fresh crack, after a while, of course, you may have, because it will be rubbing, it will be wearing, then after a while, you should have something flat, especially when you are far from the crack tip. But nearby the crack tip, it should be close to 1. This is my personal opinion. And when you observe some facies of failure of crack, you can see it is except if you work on monocrystal on crystalline materials, you can see something which is very flat, but not for metals like that.
Why was there not any plastic zone created ahead of the crack?
We do not consider plastic domain. In fact, this is what we call linear fracture analysis, linear fracture mechanics. Most people do not consider plasticity. In fact, overall, this is elastic. As you can see, the load is very low, 1.5 megapascal for this type of steel. Then the material is globally elastic. Since you have a crack tip, the stress should be almost infinite at the extremity. Then you have some plasticity, but it should be very limited. And usually, people do not consider plasticity. There is some more complexity on the work. But there is some, but you can neglect. I think this is so complex that you can make some assumption to try to get a solution.
Sir, is it possible to find that slip band effect on the subsurface, which is happened before starting the crack initiation? Actually, it is the origin of crack initiation. Is it possible to find that slip band effect through the simulation?
Yes. I think if you want to work on that, you need to have a crystalline model for the material. Here we assume it is homogeneous, isotropic, and so on. We do not consider multigrains. To find the sliding bands like that, you should have a crystalline model. Then some people are working on that. But without that, you cannot get a solution.
It was already mentioned that crack is initiated, is not talking about...
Yes, of course, we do not consider, yes. But how can we find the initial direction of the crack? And what you said, you should have something which is a crystalline model, I think. This is a work of our colleague from material science. We have to work on that.
One last question related to the previous one. Where we are considering mu for flat surface and the particle coming in between.
Okay.
Why we are not considering another mu between the roller and the particle?
Because by simplicity, we just wanted to have the same coefficient of friction. Yes.
This mu and another mu we are considering. Two mu we are considering, only we are leaving the third one. Mu between the cylinder and the flat surface we are considering, and flat surface and particle we are considering, but we are not considering the mu.
Yes, maybe there is two reasons for that. The first one is we assume that the friction coefficient will be very low because it is well lubricated. Then it will be the question of a few percent. And to simplify the analysis, not to have another parameter that. But I finish, I think. Then maybe you can keep it for tomorrow. Okay.
So, sorry. This, I was a little late, so, but what was the solution to this failure?
The solution. In fact, there is no solution because it happens only one time. Okay.
To avoid it for the other
Yes.
gearboxes.
Now they have to manage I don't know exactly what they did at the end. Okay, we just build the tools and so on, everything, provided the report and so on. But you can see here that there is some parameters they can play. Okay, maybe I can go back to this slide. Okay. For example, you can manage to have a deeper area with compressive residual stresses at the surface. Okay. You can manage to reduce the bending of the gear, for example, this type of things. Okay. And also they had other solutions. It was in the video. They modify the trapping of the particles by using something magnetic with highest flux with less particles, they are able to detect a failure, things like that. Okay. Something also funny in the movie was to hear that during transportation, one time, one of the gearbox fall down. And at the beginning, they were thinking that it was the cause of the failure. So now they put some sensor on the box when they carry a gearbox, but okay. And at the beginning, they didn't know what happened. In fact, completely they didn't know. And they are also very conservative in aeronautics. When they have a design, it's very complicated to change the design. Then they have to manage with what they have. Okay. Then, see you tomorrow. Then for me it's almost over. Maybe I will just try to make a small model with Abacus after you tomorrow afternoon. But
Tomorrow